Wow, a real night for travel legends, past, present, and still to come, I think. But yeah, I feel so supremely lucky to be sharing a stage with Bill Bryson. I'm sure many of you are so excited that he's here and he's going to talk to me now. I know I am. I could just quite happily sit here and go, Bill, I love your book. So then just stay quiet for the entire time and just gaze and think, well, why can't I write as well as that? But yeah, so Bill, obviously we know you as the best-selling travel writer. But I know we've spoken about this before. Travel isn't something you necessarily set out to get into, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, not once I got here. I mean, I grew up powerfully wanting to see the world because I grew up right in the middle of America in what I thought was the most boring state in the United States, Iowa. And the thing I remember very, very clearly growing up is my father subscribed to National Geographic magazines, and I can remember looking at the photographs when I was a kid growing up, and it just seemed like everywhere else in the world was more interesting, was more richly colored, was just, more wonderful things going on. And I was particularly fixated with Europe, and I wanted to go and see Europe and just see what it was like. And as soon as I was old enough to do that, I came over here. I was about 20 years old. I had such a great time hitchhiking around for 4 months that I went back to Des Moines and saved up some more money and came back again the next year and did exactly the same thing again, except at the end of the second trip, just by chance, I stumbled into a job at a psychiatric hospital just outside London, at Virginia Water in Surrey. And there I met my wife, who was not a patient, was a student nurse. And I took this job intending to stay for 3 or 4 months and just have a kind of paid holiday. But in the meantime, met my wife, started dating her, and kind of fell for her and fell for England simultaneously. And everything then followed on from that, which didn't even come close to answering your question, did it? But the answer is that that was all the traveling I wanted to do. I mean, having come over here, that was my life's adventure, and finding myself living unexpectedly in a new country, that fulfilled all of my wishes. But I still enjoy traveling, but I don't travel in anything like a serious way that almost everybody in this room does, and goes off to these exotic places and do wonderful things and haul women out of Arctic waters and all of that kind of thing. So no, I'm not a great serious traveler.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Bill, but a lot of us have conversations sometimes for fun and say, if ever there was a movie made about me, who would I get to play me? So my question to you would be, would you have picked Robert Redford to play you?
Well, I was obviously very glad that it was Robert Redford who played me. But you cannot believe the number of people who have said to me, but wouldn't it have been more appropriate if Nick Nolte had played you?
How'd you take that, Bill?
And I have to admit they were right. But the way I see it is that Robert Redford, as a man who's 78, is actually pretty close to the way I was when I was 44. So I'm happy to have him play me, yeah.
And of course, this was in A Walk in the Woods, which was about your book, which was about your attempt at doing the Appalachian Trail in the US, which is a 14-state crossing epic challenge of 2,180 miles or thereabouts, because they can't quite agree on it. So, you say you're not a serious traveller, but that's a serious undertaking and a serious challenge. What were the best bits of doing it, and what were the hardest bits of doing it?
Well, it was all hard. I mean, it really was really all hard. I don't think, even if we hadn't prepared at all, I went hiking with this spectacularly inappropriate old mate named Stephen Katz, and we didn't prepare at all, so it was a real shock to the system. But I do think that even if you had prepared mentally, it's still a shock to the system, because you just, if you're thinking about 2,200 miles, if I ask people to visualize that, they'll be thinking in terms of airplane miles or automobile miles. We're talking about foot miles, and nobody, you just can't conceive of what it's like to try and walk 2,200 miles. It's just so hard, and it's so vast, and it's so challenging. So it was really, 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 really hard all the time. And you get rained on, and you're cold and wet, and pretty wretched a lot of the time. But the good part is when that isn't happening, when you actually get a sunny day, and because you've suffered so much, it feels fantastic. Or when you get up to the top of a mountain and you get a view, and you realize that the only way that anybody can get this view is to walk up there. I mean, is to go through all the effort and endurance that's necessary to get yourself to that summit. which I suppose is true of a lot of exotic travel experiences. But that was the real reward for me, and that did actually make it worthwhile. I mean, that was a huge payoff. So that was the idea of not just that you were getting these spectacular reviews, but that the reviews that no one else could possibly see unless they had gone through exactly that same sort of exertion.
And do you think having a wonderful guide with you on something like the Appalachian Trail would have made any difference to how hard it was? Because they'd be pointing things out to you, or... Well,
the Appalachian Trail would have been somebody with a motorized vehicle to take us up to the top. But no, guides, yeah, I mean, I've never used guides in my research for books, partly because of the kind of the books I'm doing. I'm going around places like Australia or, places where I don't really, I'm not so separated from the culture that I need that kind of assistance. But I did just once, I was invited to Mexico City by the British Council some years ago. I was very, very proud of that because I'm an American citizen, but I was being treated as a sort of honorary Briton by the British Council and invited to go there. And I was allowed to take my daughter with me, or one of my kids with me, and my daughter, who was about 15 at the time, went with me. And we had a couple of just fantastic days in Mexico City under the care of the British Council. But what I didn't realize was then they left us on our own for a couple of days to just do whatever we wanted. And what I discovered from them the 2 days that we were in their care was that Mexico City is a wildly dangerous place. I don't know what it's like now. This was in the early 1980s. And it was just, spectacularly dangerous to be a tourist wandering around there. And I felt particularly vulnerable and responsible because here's my little girl is 15 years old and I'm looking after her. So prompted by a feeling that we needed some safety, I employed a guide for the first and only time I'd ever done it. And I got the hotel to book me a guide, and he turned up, and he was about 82 years old, and absolutely would have been able to do nothing to help us or defend us. But he was so incredibly well informed, and he took us around, and I realized then it's such an enriching experience if you have somebody who can take you to all the places and explain things to you and show you all the things that you wouldn't otherwise know. So that was my one real experience with the guide, and it left me with a profound respect for what they do.
Well, and you can sort of argue that through your books and your latest book, which is, if you haven't read it yet, go get it, it's wonderful. You're sort of guiding us through Britain in a way, because you're traveling through Britain, and also guiding us through the British psyche, I'd say, at the same time. I mean, do you think of it as a bit of a guide in that way, or?
Well, I mean, what it is, Phoebe, is just, I've known this country now for 40 years. I've lived slightly over half of my life in Britain now, altogether. And so, this is pretty well home for me in one sense, but at the same time, even though I've lived here for so long and I've been married to an English woman, my kids were all born here and still live here, so even though I'm really plugged into the country, I will always be an outsider here, and I will always be here voluntarily. I choose to live here. Well, I'm not here because I was born here, obviously. And so what the whole book is about really is, what is it what is it that keeps me here? What is it why am I so attached to this country? And it's a harder question to answer than you would expect. I mean, there's lots and lots of obvious things that I like and admire very much about Britain, but it's not just because you have hundreds of years of stable democracy behind you. That's not a reason to live in a country. It's a reason to admire it, but not a reason to live there. And the reasons that the whole book is kind of an exploration of what is it that has about this place that has such a fantastic hold on me.
Yeah, and do you feel like it's changed a lot in the time you've been here?
Yes and no. I mean, particularly if you look at 40 years, it's changed, hugely, and in almost every way for the better. I really do think. I mean, the food is so much better. Particularly kind of like, sandwiches and British rail sandwiches. Just that at that level, it's just fantastically better. Healthcare is much better. The rail service is much better. People are just vastly wealthier. I mean, the amount of money that the average person has in his pockets. I know everybody feels poor and hard done by, but the amount of spending money that people have, the amount of money that my kids have compared with when I was their age is just, there's no comparison. So by all of those measures, I think it's much better off. Some things have deteriorated, of course, but I think the real miracle is that so much of it hasn't changed. I think that it's held on to so many things. The one part of it that always leaps to mind for me is the beauty of the countryside. I think that it's just the most extraordinary, magnificent achievement, that wherever you are in this country, you're no more than 30 minutes from some glorious landscape somewhere. And I don't mean just, very fine landscape. I mean world-class, absolutely dazzling landscapes. Everybody in the country has that, wherever you are. And you think of all the pressures that there are to build on that, to utilize it, to make, treat it as an underdeveloped resource and utilize it in some way. And all these pressures that come from both from left and right. Everybody wants to seem to develop it from all political persuasions. And the fact that it's still there and it's still so magnificent is, I think, one of the great achievements and something that people just take for granted here completely. And
do you have a favorite place in the world? Could you narrow a favorite place down?
Well, yeah. I mean, the place that has a real hold on me, and I don't even really entirely understand it, is the Yorkshire Dales. I lived there for 8 years. I love Yorkshire. I really do. I love the people. I love their kind of crustiness and everything. As I said in one of my books, if you want to know your shortcomings, you won't find more helpful people anywhere. But I also I love that landscape. And I wouldn't argue for a moment that it is necessarily the most beautiful landscape, even just within Britain. I think, the Highlands of Scotland are probably even finer, and the Lake District you could make a very powerful case for the Lake District. But there's just something to me about the Yorkshire Dales. When I'm there, I just feel really happy. I just want to continue being there.
And is there anywhere, obviously we think of you as traveling a lot, is there anywhere that you've not traveled that you're desperate to go to?
Oh, yeah, actually lots of places, lots and lots of places. My traveling is so patchy, and it's been focused, disproportionately on the English-speaking world. So I know, most of the English-speaking world I know pretty well: Australia, the United States, Britain, Canada. I've spent a lot of time in all those countries, but I've missed out a lot of the more exotic part of the world. I've never been to India, which I can't believe I've still never been there.
A good guide.
I would love to go to India. I'd love to go to Russia. I've never been to Russia. I've barely touched Africa and large parts of South America. So there's still, the great thing about planet Earth is that it's just, it's effectively infinite. You never run out of places worth seeing.
And could you ever be a guide, do you think? How would you be as a guide?
No. I could. I mean, I haven't. If you think Paul is testy and difficult to be with, I would. He's an absolute saint compared with the way I would be. No, I haven't got that kind of patience. I think it is extraordinary what they do, and the kind of sacrifices they have to make in order to keep everybody happy and comfortable and keep people motivated and going along. I think that's extraordinary.
And having been a judge since we've started these awards, it must be so difficult. Like Lynn said, we get 1,000, 2,000, different people coming in. I mean, how do you do it?
It really is impossible. I mean, it is literally impossible in a lot of ways, because we don't. The only way to do it would be if each of us went out and experienced a trip with each of those guides. That would be the only way. And even then, it probably wouldn't be necessarily be fair, because we'd all have slightly different experiences, and they wouldn't always be comparable. So we really have to trust a lot on the people that you hear out here cheering so loud. And we read the testimonials. I think you can tell when they are very sincere. You really get a sense, particularly when there's a lot of them. When you see a lot of people and expressing themselves, just going to the trouble of making a testimonial for one of the guides is, that's quite an undertaking in itself. And so we base a lot on that. Then we base a lot on just what we've read about them. Sometimes they have their own presentations and things like that. And then a lot of it, we just cross our fingers and hope for the best. The one thing I'm absolutely certain of is that the ones that get here, the ones that actually end up in London on the shortlist, are always sound choices. And so, I think every year and when you meet them, you feel like, yes, we really did, quite how we did it, but we did seem to choose the best people, without question.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that, Bill. And without further ado, then, we're going to have a look at some of the past winners with Lynn Hughes back to the stage. So thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you.